The greatest danger in the Taiwan Strait. Even if China avoids a war of choice, a miscalculation could spark a war of chance. Tension across the Taiwan Strait has raised fears that Beijing and Taipei could soon find themselves at war. Most observers imagine two possible avenues that could lead to conflict. In a so-called war of choice, Beijing could try to capture Taiwan by force after careful consideration of the economic, military, and political risks. Such an aggressive action without explicit provocation would reflect Chinese leaders' judgment that the island could be taken at minimal cost. Alternately, Beijing might launch a so-called war of necessity if it felt that Taiwan had crossed a political red line that permanently threatened China's control of the island. A formal declaration of independence in Taipei, for example, would likely trigger a military response from Beijing, regardless of the costs. A third possibility, however, has received much less attention, yet may be even more likely. A war between China and Taiwan could result from an accident or miscalculation that spirals out of control. The risks of such a war of chance are high compared with other parts of the world, in part because both military forces operate in close proximity. Domestic political dynamics on both sides of the Taiwan Strait make backing down difficult, and the possibility of U.S. intervention on Taiwan's behalf raises the stakes, which means that a chance encounter could escalate a small skirmish into a larger war. Unlike a war of choice or a war of perceived political necessity, which can be avoided by strengthening deterrence against China and preventing Taiwan's pursuit of de jure independence, respectively, China, Taiwan, and the United States cannot eliminate the risk of a war of chance, but shrewd statesmanship by leaders can manage it. Such a sequence has numerous historical precedents. World War I, which was triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian nationalist in 1914, is a classic example of how a war of chance can develop. The Austro-Hungarian Empire's retributive demands against Serbia led Russia, a Serbian ally, to mobilize its forces, which in turn provoked Germany to build up troops against Russia and England, another Russian ally. Within a month, a single act of violence had engulfed the entire world in war. The Revolutionary War in the United States began when a British soldier in Concord, Massachusetts, opened fire on local militia forces against orders. This accidental shot heard round the world launched the war that led to U.S. independence. The Peloponnesian War of the 5th century BC began with a quarrel between opposing factions in the city-state of Epidamnos, in modern-day Albania, which snowballed into a clash involving the major rivals Athens and Sparta. And the Second Opium War began in 1856, when Chinese officials boarded a British vessel and arrested the crew. Unwilling to suffer the indignity of the arrest, England responded with attacks against Chinese coastal forts near Canton, culminating in a blow to the Qing dynasty, remembered as a key episode in China's Century of Humiliation. History suggests that three main factors combine to increase the risks of a war of chance. All three of these factors are present in cross-strait relations today. Chinese air and naval forces are operating increasingly close to the main island of Taiwan to gradually erode the informal boundaries between China and Taiwan. In January, Chinese jets crossed the center line of the Taiwan Strait 248 times, compared with 72 times in January 2024. In April 2024, a Chinese fighter came within about 40 miles of the island, a 5-minute flight to downtown Taipei. As part of the Strait Thunder military exercise in April, Chinese Navy ships entered Taiwan's 24 nautical mile contiguous zone for the first time. Chinese Coast Guard ships have been venturing closer to territory held by Taiwan as well, and in 2024 they arrested the crew of a Taiwan-flagged vessel near Kinmen, which is part of Taiwan, but sits just off the coast of China's Fujian province. The exact type of incident that could spark a war of chance. Chinese forces are likely to exert greater pressure on Taiwan in the years ahead. As Taiwan becomes accustomed to aggressive maneuvers and such actions lose their desired effect of pressuring the island, the PLA will need to add to its coercive repertoire by taking progressively greater risks. Chinese Air Force sorties may encroach farther on Taiwan's territorial airspace, and ships may close in on the island's territorial seas, raising the risk of collisions or misperceptions of Chinese intent among Taiwan's defenders. If an accident does occur, finding an off-ramp will be difficult because of political considerations for leaders on both sides of the strait. no Chinese leader will want to suffer the embarrassment of backing down against what the Chinese Communist Party has long framed as a rogue secessionist movement. Nor will Beijing want to lose face by withdrawing if the United States or other foreign powers line up to defend Taiwan, because doing so would roil nationalist sentiment among a population taught that the party will defend the nation's core interests. Taiwan's leaders might want to be cautious in escalating tensions with China, given the relative weakness of their military force, but they would also face a political price at home if they back down too easily, given support in Taiwan for autonomy from the mainland. About a quarter of the island's residents want independence now or in the future. Anti-Chinese protests could break out in Taiwan's cities and embolden independence activists to press their agenda more forcefully, which would alarm Beijing. Finally, although Taiwan has no official military allies, U.S. involvement could expand the crisis. Washington might not be able to distinguish between an accident and a provocation, or it could interpret the events as a pretext for an invasion and begin sending its own forces into the area. Strong bipartisan pressure on the White House to intervene could force the president's hand. Worried that failure to act would make the administration look weak, embolden China, and undercut the credibility of U.S. commitment among East Asian allies such as Japan and the Philippines, the U.S. president could order rapid mobilization, which could lead to escalation and even preemptive strikes if Beijing believes it is about to face a U.S. attack. Beijing may intend for encroaching flights and ship transits to exert psychological pressure on Taiwan's government, led by the independence-leaning President William Lai, without causing a war, but the actions of individual aviators and sailors could unintentionally cross a line. Preventing a war of chance between China and Taiwan requires reducing the opportunities for interactions that could be misinterpreted as aggressive acts. The PLA needs to exercise caution in how close airplanes and naval and coast guard ships come to Taiwan and its offshore islands such as Kinmen and Matsu. Meanwhile, Taiwan's military should exercise prudence in its rules of engagement and not assume that every close call is intentional. Leaders on both sides of the strait, especially Chinese President Xi Jinping, can help by giving clear internal messages to their forces that they will not tolerate rogue displays of showmanship from service members. China and Taiwan do ultimately need some level of communication to discuss crisis prevention and find off-ramps that both sides can accept without losing face. Research institutes, for example, could be designated to pass information and offers across the strait. These channels need to be established and safeguarded in peacetime so that they can be quickly activated in a crisis, just as informal U.S.-Soviet contacts helped avert catastrophe during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Washington, for its part, needs to address concerns that an alliance-like commitment to Taiwan could galvanize a much larger conflict. The United States should uphold its long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity with respect to Taiwan's defense. It is thus encouraging that U.S. President Donald Trump has declined to offer specific guarantees to Taiwan. What is alarming is that almost all public war games are premised on an intentional use of force by Beijing, with little focus on how the United States and Taiwan should respond to a crisis triggered by accident. Improvisation, necessitated by a lack of preparation, would be more than dangerous. It could lead to another world historic calamity of chance.